You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, July 16th, 2013. Getting into the week. Got a lot of stuff to talk about today. And our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in the control room managing the Truth Warp Drive, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, you would think that with the much anticipated, indeed overhyped, race riots in the wake of the Zimmerman verdict not happening, the American corporate media would immediately go back to Floodgate and all those scandals and embarrassments that are troubling the federal government. But no. We're back to full condensation mode. And they're going on and on. Well, they're still going on about the reactions to the Zimmerman verdict. Yeah, some people agreed, some people disagreed. You know, it's not really news that affects all of us, and they're spending a lot of time about this situation down in San Diego, where Mayor Filner is being accused of sexual harassment by former staffers, and they're making a big deal about this. And, you know, it's condensation. They're trying to find tawdry sex scandals will get, you know, death, grief, murder, blood, sorrow. Because they don't want to talk about NSA Gate, IRS Gate, Benghazi Gate, EPA Gate, Plum Gate, the economy, the crumbling war agenda. And so they're just out there. It's like tabloid celebrity news and a bunch of stuff out there. Fox News actually ran a story earlier today confirming that terrorists, yeah, we believe that one, can in fact remotely hack into modern computer-equipped, Bluetooth-equipped, Wi-Fi, cell phone-equipped cars and take control of them. One of the very least things, and we're not talking terrorists here, we're talking NSA, government people. One of the things that all of these cars have with OnStar is, you know, if you lose your keys, you can remotely unlock the car over the satellite link. Well, you can also do that, you know, if you're a government agent or CIA, Mossad, something like that. And you just call up and say, I'm with the CIA or Mossad here. Unlock this car for me. And you can get into the car and plant a bomb and not leave a trace you've ever been there. Michael Hastings, Michael Hastings, Michael Hastings. So Fox is actually confirming what these students up at the University of Washington found. These modern cars are wide open to remote tampering and control by nefarious individuals. And they were actually joking on the air about how, you know, people are starting to go back to low-tech. They're buying older cars so they can feel like they're safe from the government. Because we're not, you know, it's not terrorists. Terrorists aren't going to come all the way over here and attack one American in their car. It's the U.S. government that's using these systems to keep you unlocked, open, helpless, afraid. That's not working. And, of course, they're still pushing heat wave. Oh, there's a horrible heat wave in the Northeast. It's in the 90s. It's July. It's the middle of summer. I used to live in that part of the country. 90-degree temperatures in July was just what always happened. Remember, we told you yesterday, all these claims about the hottest summer on record are complete nonsense. The summer of 1936 is the hottest summer on record. And the Carbonazis are getting kind of desperate over here. Over at phys.org, they have this banner headline, Researchers Project Ice-Free Arctic by 2058. And it's talking about how these researchers, using another computer model that they set up to prove their case, that yes, the world is warming, the Arctic will be ice-free by 2058. Now, by 2058, these researchers are all going to be dead, along with the people funding them. So this is a safe prognostication. They're not going to be embarrassed the way that, well, the British press was 10 years ago when they declared snow was a thing of the past and Iceland, or rather Greenland, was going to lose all of its ice in 20 years. We'll be right back. Okay, and welcome back to our show. And we seem to be having some kind of a technical problem in that I am hearing a phone call from our control room in Austin come out over, okay, apparently that problem has now been resolved. So we're talking about, they're still out there trying to sell the global warming thing. Oh, there's a heat wave in the Northeast. It's, you know, it's the same thing I saw when I was a kid living there. And they're out there now saying that the Arctic will be ice-free by 2058. And the people making that prediction don't have to worry about that. They're going to be dead and gone by then. It's like the people who set up the private central banking. Yeah, it's going to be a mess down the road, but I've got my funding, I got my money now, and that's all that really cares. And they probably got very tired of all the embarrassments. 10 years ago, the corporate media was saying snow was going to be a thing of the past. We've had several record-setting winters since then. In fact, all this flooding that we've been seeing all over the northern hemisphere is because all that snow they told us wasn't going to happen did happen. Melted in the spring, massive, uncontrolled flooding. And so they're going to play it safe now and put up the Arctic is going to be ice-free predictions for way into the future. And I got to tell you, these carbon Nazis are starting to remind me of the Jehovah's Witnesses, who predicted the world was going to end in 1874, then 1914, then 1925, then 1936, then 1953, and finally in 1973 after they quit being specific out of sheer embarrassment. Now, I have a quick little comment here. This comes under the heading of consumer protection. You've probably seen all over TV these commercials for these new type garden hoses that when you fill them with water, they stretch out to their full 50-foot length, and when you turn off the water, they shrivel back to this little tiny bundle that can be stored in a plant pot. And I needed a new hose out back where I'm playing around with my gardening, and so I got one over at City Mill. Didn't shrink back quite as much as it appeared to on TV, but on the third time I used it, third time I turned on the faucet for the water, the end of the hose blew out of the connector that went to the little spray nozzle I was using. 3 times I got to use this thing. So you want to be very, very leery of these things. I'm going to take this back to City Mill after the show today and say, come on, guys, you know, give me a hose that will last at least for 10 uses, you know, for that kind of money here. Alrighty, now today, of course, is a bit of a historical celebration anniversary. It is the 44th anniversary of the launch of Apollo 11 to the moon. The anniversary of the actual landing will be this coming Saturday, along with the anniversary of the Viking 1 landing on Mars and the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vince Foster. And it's kind of interesting because we're seeing this move in Congress to declare the Apollo 11 landing site as a National Historical Landmark. And this, to me, looks to be a pathetic attempt by the U.S. government to try and revive and shine in past glories of those things this nation can no longer do. We can't go to the moon anymore, let alone set up a park ranger station there. I imagine that Smokey the Bear's comment would be, I can't breathe! But you need to remember, under international treaty, the United States of America does not own the moon. They can't legally declare a national historical landmark on the moon any more than they can down in Antarctica. This is just grandstanding to remind everybody of America's greatness because we went to the moon. Well, yeah, that was 44 years ago. What have you done lately? President Obama is the first president to preside over a nation without a manned space program since Eisenhower. And it does underscore that whereas the United States may have once been the greatest nation on Earth, they most assuredly are not. And, of course, I'm old enough to remember the heyday of Apollo, and I actually got to work on Apollo 12 post-mission. And I remember being out in my backyard with my astronomical telescope. I actually built my own telescope when I was in junior high, grinding the mirror and everything. And the first night after the launch of all the Apollo missions, anybody with a decent-sized backyard astronomical telescope could see the little constellation of the Saturn IVB, the Apollo itself, and the tumbling panels from the Saturn launch adapter. Basically, these little 6 objects sort of flying along together, heading out toward the moon. And I remember that was very exciting to actually put eyeballs on there. Apparently, speaking of Apollo 12, the Saturn 4B from that mission was supposed to go into a solar orbit after they were done. Later missions, they would crash the S-4B into the moon to create seismic waves to analyze the interior of the moon. But they didn't do that with Apollo 12. And it's now been discovered that that Saturn 4B is actually still following the Earth around. There was an asteroid identified as J002E3, spotted by amateur astronomers, and after looking at it, they realized that's not a piece of rock. That is the Apollo 12, third stage of the Saturn V rocket. Another little reminder, we're going to be talking about this a lot on the show tomorrow. Tomorrow is the 17th anniversary of the shoot-down of TWA 800. We're going to be spending a lot of time on that during this show here. Now, I noticed that the government propagandists are still out there trying to kookify Snowden. They can't shut down his revelations. They can't convince the corporate media or foreign governments to just be nice and not pay attention to this. And so they're falling back on this old Cold War, poison the well tactic, and they continue to leak stories all over the blogs about how Edward Snowden is revealing the shocking truth behind chemtrails. And the other day they had one where Edward Snowden admits the government captured UFOs and space aliens in Area 51. None of this, of course, is sourced. It's all coming out of websites with no provenance and no citations whatsoever. They just put it out there and say, yes, this is what's going on. And an alarming number of other websites are picking this stuff up and carrying it without question. But it's very obviously a poison-the-well tactic. And from the comments I'm seeing on the stories, most people are smart enough to pick that up here. Now, speaking of Snowden, we're continuing to see the fallout from the revelations of the NSA spying. And it's still... Oh, I'm sorry, we got a caller on the line. Albert in New York. Aloha, Albert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike.
Aloha, nui, nui, nui.
Regarding 9/11, you've heard of this guy known as Eric Huffschmidt?
Yes. I know of him.
Is he going to appear? Is he a legitimate source?
Well, can you give me the specific item that you're dubious about?
EricHuffschmidt.net.
No, I mean, what is he saying that you're not sure about?
I'm just curious. Is he a legitimate source?
He
wrote the book?
I'm asking, what is it he said that you are having doubts about?
Well, because he wrote stuff about you that doesn't seem right.
Okay, well, you know, a lot of people do that. You know, it's
If you're in your show? Will he appear in your show?
Okay.
Will he appear in your show?
No, he's not going to be on my show.
Okay. Thanks for telling me. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay. Yeah, a lot of people say very bad things about me. You know. Oh, you're an anti-Semite. You're a Hitler lover. You're a lousy dancer. You can't carry a tune. You dress funny. All these other things that they scream at anybody who's trying to get the truth out there. All right, back to the Snowden fallout. There is still a great deal of friction regarding the European Union-U.S. trade talks. Remember, the globalists are still trying to get all these giant mega-national trade zones going to facilitate profitability. And the revelation of the NSA spying has put a definite chill onto all of these, both the Trans-Pacific Partnership and now the EU-U.S. trade talks. And all these other nations who are involved in these negotiations are now realizing they could enter into a trade agreement in which the United States has a clear business advantage because of this massive spying infrastructure, which is not really targeted on criminals or terrorists. It's targeted on people for corporate business interests. And even without going all the way back to the Seattle APEC, remember that story we reported on last week, where this spy apparatus was being intentionally targeted on people who questioned the safety and efficacy of GMO crops, that people who were challenging Monsanto were being targeted for this kind of spying. So this is all to support business interests. It has nothing to do with terrorism or crime. And these other countries that are looking to get into these, locked into these trade partnerships are understandably concerned that the U.S. has an automatic built-in advantage because they can spy on their business people in these other countries and glean important information, like how much they're going to bid on certain contracts. And then the NSA can go to American companies and say, this is the bid you have to beat. It's all about corporate espionage. It has nothing to do with national security here. Now, a story coming out of From the Trenches World Report, the NSA, and we reported this earlier, the NSA has inserted its own custom-built software into the Android operating system, which now accounts for 3/4 of all smartphones. Android licenses onto all these different carriers and brands and manufacturers, and they actually have got a larger share of the market than the iPhone operating system, which is obviously confined to the iPhones and iPads. And so they're all backdoored in there, and people are becoming more and more concerned about that. Got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I'm chatting with Manny in our control room about the little glitch that opened the show, and it happens to everybody. In fact, if you saw the Daily Show last night, apparently right after they were done taping the first segment, the entire studio lost power, and they wound up having to shoot part of the show on battery-operated cameras and lights. So it happens to all of us, you know. Budgets are cut. We don't have the adequate equipment to handle these things, and so, you know, Manny, you shouldn't feel bad. You're playing with the majors, the comedy channel. All right, we got a couple of callers on the line I want to get to before we get back to all this massive spying stuff. Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, you brought up TW-800.
Yes.
And that caused me to recall Columbia that mysteriously blew up on reentry February of '03.
There wasn't any mystery about it. There wasn't any mystery about it at all. I mean, the film of the launch clearly showed the foam insulation from the external tank hitting that portside wing route. And when they recreated it on the ground, they discovered that foam just punched right on through. And on reentry, you've got all this hot compressed gas flowing into the wing, and it just started, you know, cutting all the systems until finally Columbia just tumbled and fell apart. There's no mystery about it.
Oh, well, I heard this guy, David Sarita, mention that there was a purple corkscrew. There was a photograph that had been taken.
Yeah, I know. I heard about that. That turned out to be a defect in the camera itself. And, you know, during that final flight, you know, looking at the footage of the launch, I mean, that foam had been a problem all along.
Really?
And, you know, looking at that launch, people had said there may be a problem here. Even NASA knew there might be a problem, but because of budget cuts, they hadn't flown the manipulator arm with the remote camera. They didn't have a suit so that anybody could go out and actually take a look at the damage. NASA just did basically the same thing they've done on other missions. They just crossed their fingers and hoped it worked out all right, and it certainly did not. And it was a horrible, horrible tragedy. I mean, they knew before Challenger there was a problem of bleed-through on those O-rings.
Jeez. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
What I remember on Flight 800, various interviews with maintenance crew chiefs. I think one of them was named Saunders. He was repeatedly interviewed on Coast to Coast. And what this guy said is, there's no way that jet fuel, and just recently some pilots called in and said, there's no way, he said, I could light a match, a lighter, a torch even, in a fuel tank, will not ignite the fuel. He said, no way, it was some sort, I remember Bo Greitz came on and described that it was a military exercise where they had a bogey up there, and then they sent, a missile to intercept the bogey, and communication was failed between the Aegis, whatever you call them, planes that were directing the communications, and then the missile that was not armed with explosives. It was programmed to lock on to the nearest target, which happened to be that plane.
Well, so, you've got it about 99% correct. There was an ongoing U.S. Navy exercise. We're going to talk about this a lot tomorrow, but just to recap, you know, you are correct. There was a target drone fired into the exercise area from Long Island. The Aegis CEC system was sort of the grown-up big brother of the earlier Aegis system that accidentally shot down that Iranian passenger jet. And they were painting the incoming drone with a targeting radar that carries a code number, so when the missile comes up, it looks for a radar reflection with the correct code number and realizes that's its target. That's why Aegis can direct multiple missiles against multiple targets and not have them get confused. Unfortunately, the 747 flew into the radar targeting beam, and the missile saw 2 targets with the correct number, and it went for the larger one. And that's basically what happened. It was a horrible, tragic accident. But, you know, it isn't the accident that does them in, it's the cover-up.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. You're great.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to try and real quick grab Jeffrey in North Carolina. Aloha, Jeffrey. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing today?
I'm doing fine.
Good. My thing is that I've been paying attention to this Trayvon Martin case, and not only just his case, cases of a lot of other cases, where it seems like these laws of stand your ground are causing a whole lot more problems than they're actually curing to make people safe. The problem, it seems like, is when does it become a stand your ground case or a self-defense or anything if they have to initiate what the aggressor is? Because clearly if somebody's walking along and they're not up to anything or they're not doing anything no more than probably paying attention to what they're doing, that they've been doing, that's a natural occurrence for them, it seems like to me that the judiciary system, valid as the laws are in this country and everything else, is that, you know, it's whoever thinks whatever it is or whatever they figure that that's what went on is the truth. And nobody really cares about whether or not that there was a minor killed, whether he's black, Mexican, Asian, or whatever. An adult kills a minor has another adult looking over him, and nobody wants to say, well, look, this was a minor.
Right. Jeffrey, we got to take a break for commercials. I'm going to respond to you when we come back. America, welcome back to the show. We're talking with Jeff in North Carolina about the Trayvon Martin case. Now, I have purposely avoided going into the details of the case itself because it was obvious to me all along this one case had been selected to be politicized, to sell this idea of racial tension in America, to try and split the population in two and get us quarreling with each other so we wouldn't unite together against a common threat to us all. Did it back in the 60s, doing it again. Now, my personal opinion, for what it's worth, and I'm not saying this is what went on, but my personal opinion is George Zimmerman lost his stand your ground defense the moment he proceeded to follow Trayvon after the police dispatcher told him to quit. And if George Zimmerman is protected by stand your ground, then so is Trayvon Martin, who was just out there with his Skittles, approached by a complete stranger who started harassing him. Now, I don't want to get into who's right and who's wrong because the courts have already ruled on that. But again, it is obvious this one case was picked out. Somebody in the Department of Justice was looking for an incident like this that they could politicize. And we now know, because of Judicial Watch, the Department of Justice spent your tax dollars encouraging and supporting protests against George Zimmerman in order to make this a news story that they could hammer for political gain. And the good news is that, with the exception of some obvious agent provocateurs, there have been no violent racial riots across the country, either to use as a distraction from Floodgate or to justify martial law, and all those worst-case scenarios did not come to happen. And frankly, it looks to me like it's underscored two things. One, yes, there is still racism in this country, but it's not the all-consuming problem the government is trying to convince us it is, to the exclusion of everything else. And two, again, the government has lost the propaganda narrative among the American people. They're making these continuing misassessments of public reaction to their propaganda, and that kind of tells me, you know, they've lost control. They've lost control of the minds of America. They've lost control of America's political views. We're in the end game here, and it's a race between collapse of the current corrupted system and their succeeding in escalating World War III into a full-on global nuclear conflict. Jeffrey, do you have anything else to add to that?
Oh, it seems like more of a basis that, you know, if our governing system will concentrate on more putting the government to where they should be concentrating on getting everybody back to work and taking care of the task at hand of running the country instead of trying to run and ruin everything, you'd probably be better off. But
I agree.
The law system is getting to the point you can't really understand it because they're changing it so much, and it's really just making where people are being at a disadvantage rather than having an advantage of knowing that, you know, they can have faith in the judiciary system or in our government system to take care of what they were sworn in to do, take care of our interests instead of taking care of everybody else's interests.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
It kills everything, and they're looking to try and start something bigger and everything else. We don't trust you. You're showing us that you don't have our well intentions in mind. Why are we voting for you? Why are you in there? Why are you doing what you're doing? And it's obvious that if you're trying to do this, that you're not an agent of good, you're an agent of evil, and it needs to be dispersed.
You're absolutely right there, and I would add to that, we don't know whether or not we actually voted in this government. Vote fraud, election fraud is epidemic in this country. And you're absolutely right about the laws just being applied selectively based on politics. And again, a lot of people have made a big stink, and rightly so, over another case also in Florida, in which a woman who had a protective order against her estranged husband, he came over, violated the protective order, was threatening her, she fired a gun into the air, did not shoot him, did not hurt anyone, and they sentenced her to 20 years for discharging the firearm. And when you look at that versus the situation with Zimmerman and Martin, it is very obvious the laws are not just, even, or absolute. And over this whole Zimmerman case, I got lots and lots of emails pointing out incidents where there was black-on-white crime that was sort of played down by the corporate media because they were afraid of Al Sharpton screaming that they were being racists, rather. And, you know, it's all, we've descended into a totally politically dominated way of thought, just like the former Soviet Union. Everything is political. There are no absolutes, there's no justice, there's no honesty. Everything is always evaluated in terms of its political impact on various vested interests. Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
All right. Well,
okay, thank you very much.
We're going to let you go and switch over to Don in... actually, I'm going to take them out of sequence here. If you don't mind, Manny, I'd like to switch over to Ryan Dawson. So, Ryan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Ryan, are you there? Okay, we seem to have a problem. Let's go back to Don in Ohio. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Oh, there's Ryan. Okay, there's...
Sorry. Sorry, I'll be quick so you can get it.
No, that's okay. We're just having technical glitches today, but after what happened on the Daily Show last night, I'm not feeling so bad.
Well, it might be on my end. I don't know. We have a lot of earthquakes and things here, but I just wanted to say you're absolutely right with the Trayvon case. That was a complete media fail. They hyped that up for a long time, and I mean, I agree, it was a disaster. I mean, Zimmerman murdered that kid. He had no business following him. But that said, I mean, I think it was very clear. You can see there's murders every day in the United States. But if you really want a case to get angry about that isn't so controversial, then look at the Ayanna Jones case in Detroit, where the cops broke into the wrong house. He shot a 7-year-old girl, who was also a black kid, who was asleep, and nearly shot her grandmother. Now, that's a lot worse than the videos going around with the cops shooting the dogs and things like that. They killed a 7-year-old girl who was asleep on a couch when they raided the wrong house. And the reason the cops are being a little bit more Rambo than usual is they had one of these stupid cop TV shows. So since the cameras were there, they thought they could be a little bit more macho and then bust in the door. Of course, they went in the wrong house and they just murdered somebody. And that police officer who shot her was put on paid leave.
Oh.
And
kill a child, get a paid vacation. Oh, boy, that's...
Paid vacation. So people are worried about martial law coming because of riots. Look, we have martial law already. Cops kill people every day. They shoot dogs, they shoot children, and now we have neighborhood watch people killing people. It's already there. But it was a complete fail, and I hope it had... I don't think Zimmerman was racist. I think he's a murdering psychopath, but I really don't think he was a racist. They turned it into a race issue because it's ratings and it's division. that's all that was about. It's a stupid circus.
It really was. The U.S. government is trying to play divide and conquer with the American people. They did it back in the 1960s, and it comes down to a concept called common identity, which is a psychological concept when you're looking at a nation that is heading toward a revolution. One of the essential first steps is that the people of the nation have to unite around a common cause. In the case of the American Revolution, it was getting rid of the British government and the Bank of England, and the identity of the people came to be patriot against the British. And back in the 1960s, the American people were coming together and uniting against the disastrous war in Vietnam. And so the United States government, through the FBI's COINTELPRO program, set out to, first of all, discredit the civil rights movement, which was out there screaming about all the black kids who were going into the war zone, and the white people who were saying, yeah, we agree with them. This is a bad idea. And so they came out with things like the Black Panther coloring book. They infiltrated the Black Panthers and tricked them into acting like militants so they could be scary, and the media could say, oh, they're scary, they've got guns, they've got this and that. And the Black Panthers' original agenda was breakfast for the ghetto kids and local control of the school curriculum. And they're doing it again. The one thing the United States government is most afraid of right now is the American people waking up one morning and realizing they are an American people. Black, white, brown, yellow, green, peach, taupe, mauve, gay, straight, young, old, man, women, and so forth. And we all unite together and realize we are all patriots against an oppressive, tyrannical, unconstitutional government. And that's why they tried to use this Trayvon Martin tragedy to fan up race relations. And we're still seeing they're commenting, oh, how wrong it was. And I'm seeing all these articles on the blogosphere saying, oh, racism is alive and well. You've got to be worried about race relations. No, we've got to be worried about the economy. We've got to be worried about these wars that we ultimately cannot win. We've got to be worried about runaway, rampant, incentivized Wall Street financial corruption. NSA spying. We've got to worry about all those things that affect our direct lives and not get suckered into fighting each other, which is what the U.S. government wants.
The cops are getting out of control, too.
They absolutely are.
You load a shotgun, you go to jail. You fire a warning shot, you go to jail for 20 years. You shoot a kid, you get put on paid leave.
Well, the reason that was not given a lot of media coverage is the U.S. government doesn't want the American people fighting law enforcement. They want the American people fighting each other. And I notice they're trying to fan up abortion is a big thing again, and gay marriage. It's almost like it's an election year where they're just trying to push all of these little side fringe issues to get the American people arguing among themselves and not paying attention to what the government and Wall Street are up to.
They'll do anything to get attention off the NSA. They'll even flip-flop between the Muslim Brotherhood back to the military and back again in Egypt, all of which are on the same side.
Well,
I mean, that's how it is. The Muslim Brotherhood's base may be supporting them, but it's just like Obama's base was anti-war, but they still voted in a more warmongering, psychotic
I'm not sure Obama's base is that solid any longer. We had a caller on the show yesterday saying, oh, the black population are still supporting him unquestioningly. Well, I think if they were, we probably would have seen more riots over the last weekend.
Oh, I think he's lost it, but I'm just saying in the beginning, the odd thing was you had all these anti-war people voting for a warmonger, and he clearly was. It wasn't just like he was lying. While he was a senator, he voted to keep the Patriot Act. He voted to finance the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. He co-sponsored the bill for sanctions on Iran. It was real clear who he really was, and they voted for him. And a lot of that's happening in Egypt too. You have this popular revolt against the government, and yet they already had one last year. The thing is, they realized quickly the guy they got in didn't do anything he said, and unlike our country, when they lied like that, they rose up again. But it's still going to be a mess, and I know people who hate the Muslim Brotherhood are cheering this and thinking that this change is for the better, but it's not. The military is bought and paid for by the U.S. It's a step sideways. It's not a step up.
I'm not sure about that last one, because one of the reasons why the military decided to step in against Morsi was that Morsi had signed on to the Syria agenda and was going to deploy Egyptian troops to Syria, and the Egyptian troops just did not want to do that. I'll tell you, the biggest problem that the White House is facing right now is every issue they've got that they can fling out there as a distraction has its own problems. And that's, NSA Gate is getting really big. Well, leak something more about IRS Gate. And, they're in a situation. They don't have anything that they can use to try and rally support for the government, because everything out there is tainted and questionable, and you're dealing with an American people who are so distrustful of the federal government. The latest Gallup poll has trust and approval in Congress below that of North Korea. The writing's on the wall with that one. And so the American people, I think the instant that common American identity starts to gel in the population is when we're going to start seeing a lot more anger surfacing directed against various levels of government.
That's right. Don't let it be split up by demographic groups.
No,
as Americans, we have to oppose injustice.
That's right. We are all Americans.
Doing it, just like you said. They'll say like gay or straight or black or white or Latino or Jewish or whatever. Don't fall for that. And I'm really glad to actually see that race-baiting junk isn't really working anymore.
No, it
all
didn't.
through the 90s, it was
Epic
their golden
fail.
goose.
Epic fail. Again, the White House, they must be on SSRIs. They're continuing to make all these very bad decisions and misjudge the reaction of what they're doing. And that tells me that Obama must have surrounded himself with a bunch of highly paid yes men and yes women for his advisors, because they continue to misread the reaction of what they're doing. And I think there's a lot of wishful thinking. We're still the greatest government on earth, and people will do what we tell them. No, those days are gone.
Well, a lot of that's because of people like you and shows like yours that can call it out before it happens, saying, here's what they're doing, they're race-baiting, this is what this trial is about. I know you were saying it forever, I was saying it forever. And it's not working anymore. The mass media is failing, but you know who's growing?
Yep, we are.
The alternative media.
We
That's
absolutely are. And again, the reason the truth and the Republic will ultimately prevail is the government is trapped by centuries of accumulated lies against the American people. They have to go on playing the game by the rules they used back at the height of the Cold War, 1950s and 1960s, but those rules don't work anymore. This last weekend proved it. And so they're in thrash mode over there. All right, Ryan, we're going to let you go. We got callers waiting on the line very patiently. We're going to switch over to Don in Ohio. Don, thank you for waiting while Ryan got on the air. What's on your mind?
Oh, yeah, I got 4 quick items. Hopefully I can get through them. 2 of them are on NASA. One's on Obamacare. One's on the Obama phone. First, on NASA, they knew when they were already, after they launched and they were in space and stuff like that, they had to know that there was something wrong because the air conditioning units went down and they had to move their living experiments over into a different part of the craft.
Which mission are we talking about here? I know
Columbia.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to clarify that for the listeners.
Yeah, they had to move the any living experiments over to a different part of the craft because the air conditioning units failed. I think the air conditioning units were basically bad underneath, another part of the tile that was gone. Strangely enough, I have this program that you can check between 2 dates. It's called Calendar 121, and I put in the first landing on the moon and first man on the moon and the last man on the moon. And strangely enough, if you go right at the halfway point, it landed on April 1st, April Fool's Day.
Oh, okay. Come on.
No, swear to God on that.
Okay, yeah. Call it a coincidence.
And no, I'll send you the information. I have to download the program again, but I have to get the information again. But it did land on April Fool's Day, right at the apex.
Okay.
Okay, Obamacare. Because I take care of my mom, she's disabled and stuff like that, I can't go out and work. So, I have to rely on something called HCAP here in Ohio, which basically paid for the bills and stuff like that, basically like an illegal alien. So, recently I had to get some surgery done, and I went in and got surgery done, and they sent me a bill, and I called them up on this, and they said, well, now it only covers 40% instead of what used to cover, which was 100%.
We went through that recently when my wife had to go to the ER, and we got kind of screwed over by the insurance there. Don, going to have to let you go. Got to take a commercial break. Back with more phone calls after these words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Terry in Texas. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, I wanted to lend maybe a little bit of credence to what you were talking about, the fact that this Trayvon thing was earmarked right up front for hyper, sensationalism or whatever.
Sensationalization.
Look, I'm on YouTube right now, and I'm looking at this video called Police Shoot Man Over 40 Times. And this is 5 white officers with a black dude about 30 feet away from them, with his back turned to them, walking away from them. And they just murdered him. And if you want to talk about something that should probably cause a riot, that would be one of them. This Trayvon thing, it is something of a mind game. It's called Police Shoot Man Over 40 Times. It's up in, I believe, Michigan. And it's just a case of all white, 5 white guys shooting a black guy 30 feet away from them. Any one of those officers could have walked up to him with a taser, put him down, put him in jail. I'm sure that you will look at this video, and a lot of people will. You know, so anyway, it's just proof that what you're saying is true. The Trayvon thing was definitely, I mean, when the president comes out and says he could have been my son, come on, give me
they were just humping that one right from the start. And again, and we've seen a lot of these shootings where the police will go out and just empty their guns into some guy, but that's not fanned up. Because the government...
They treated that man worse than you would ever see a dog. If you saw a dog treated like that, you'd get mad. And to do it to a human being, a black man no less, all 5 white officers, come on, this is something like the police. In fact, you can, in that case, you can call them not police, but terrorists. Because, believe me, that man was terrorized after about the first 20 bullets.
As I'm sure everybody else in the neighborhood was for weeks thereafter.
And they probably still are. They're just afraid of their own department. It's a horrible, horrible situation.
But
police shoot man over 40 times.
The reason it was not fanned up as an issue in the corporate media is the goal for the U.S. government is to get Americans fighting Americans, not to have Americans fighting against police authority and the government itself. And that is why they focused on Trayvon Martin, to try and fan up race hatred, to divide and conquer us. And the reason they're downplaying these stories of abusive law enforcement, because they don't want the American people uniting together against that abusive authority. And so that's the reason for the disparity.
Yes. Thank you. All right. We're on the same sheet.
All right.
See you later, man.
All right. Thanks
Bye-bye.
an awful lot. Thanks an awful lot. Yeah, there's been a big push for this stuff, you know, and it goes back way before Trayvon Martin. I mean, there's been a whole slew of movies like Django that are just selling the idea of black rage against the oppressive whites. And I'm sorry, the slaves and the slave owners, they're all dead and gone. And they keep fanning that. We'll be back after station again. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And earlier, in response to one of the callers, I made the observation that the White House is consistently making very bad guesses about the reaction to its statements. And I'm not sure whether it's simply because Obama has surrounded himself with a bunch of yes men and yes women, or they're all on SSRIs, or they have a seriously overinflated view of their own moral authority over the rest of the world. And just this last hour, Fox News was running a story about how the White House is now demanding Russia expel Edward Snowden. As you've probably heard, there's some negotiations going on between the Russian government and Edward Snowden to grant him temporary asylum so he can at least move out of the airport transit area. And in exchange, Snowden says he will release no more bad information about the United States while he is still in Russia. Of course, what the Russian government will get from him is a completely different story. So the White House is saying, we demand you expel Snowden. Well, now look at this from Putin's point of view. If he denies asylum now, it's going to look like Putin is bowing to the United States of America, and Putin's not going to do that. With this very arrogant statement, the White House has created a political climate in which Russia is really not going to be thinking about getting rid of Snowden, because it would look like they're doing as they're told by the United States. So this is going to backfire on them, I think, because of that one statement. Russia will now grant Snowden temporary asylum inside Russia, while he figures out where else he's going to go in the world. Now, getting back to the NSA spying, there's a new scandal coming from down under. Telstra, which is Australia's largest telecommunications company, has been handing over all of their customer data to the FBI since 2001, ostensibly because of an agreement that was signed in the wake of 9/11. But we know that the United States and Australia have been spying on each other's citizens and trading information way before 9/11, going all the way back to the Echelon system. Australia was one of the 5 nations that formed this global network to intercept all communication satellite and radio data, telephone data, and share it with each other to evade each nation's privacy laws. The United States doesn't spy on Americans. We have the Australians do it and give us the data. And we, in turn, in America, spy on the Australians and give the Australians that data so they're not in violation of their domestic privacy laws. And that's how that whole thing works. And so the scandal continues to grow, and people are understandably very, very angry about it, especially all those serving military in the war zone who thought they were having a private moment with their significant other. And they'd call home from the war zone and say, gee, baby, I really miss you. As soon as I see you, we're going to get out the lemonade and the whipped cream and do that kinky thing that you like with the frozen scampi. And now we find out the NSA has been listening into those calls, and the really juicy ones get copied off and traded around. Now, over at WashingtonsBlog.com, they're asking a very relevant question, and one I have been asking all along. Why doesn't the government use this mass surveillance to go after the big criminals on Wall Street? Why don't they do something useful with it? Why don't they go after all these malware authors who are loading up our computers with mail bots to send out Viagra ads? Or flooding the net with porn, for those who don't like porn. This thing absolutely doesn't seem to serve any purpose that benefits we the people at all. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, this week, while we're all being distracted with the mayor of San Diego's sexual harassment and other such contentization, Congress is actually starting to hold hearings into the abusive use of the Internal Revenue Service to target critics of the government, the Occupy movement, the Tea Party, which, remember, that was an article of impeachment for Richard Milhouse Nixon. And their Congress is starting their hearings now. And amazingly enough, or perhaps not so amazingly in this day and age, the FBI, at the start of congressional hearings into the IRS targeting, has not contacted any of the targeted groups involved in the class action suit against the Internal Revenue Service. Can you imagine? Congress is holding hearings, they're talking to the FBI, and the FBI hasn't actually gone out and talked to any of these people who were harassed by the IRS. So we know what the FBI is going to do. They're going to go in and say, we have found absolutely nothing to support the idea that the IRS targeting of these groups was intentional or politically motivated. That's what they're going to say. They're getting ready to lie to you again. Anyway, interesting article over at activistpost.com basically saying lawlessness is now official U.S. policy, at least for the government. The United States federal government is no longer abiding by that contract between we the people and the government we allow to run the nation for the benefit of the nation and its people. They're completely illegal and illegitimate. And now they know we know, and that's why they're trying to basically slam the prison cells shut before we do anything about it. That's why they tried this pathetic attempt to kick up race riots this last week. Get us quarreling amongst ourselves, because the one thing they're most terrified of right now is the American people waking up and realizing we are a single American people of all colors, all faiths, all orientations, all genders, all of us together, one American people with a single common enemy against us all. Private central banking issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, and a government that serves the bankers and not the people. We're going to grab a phone call here. Janet in Florida. Aloha, Janet. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
On the tail of the Trayvon Martin case that's been thrown at us as it's really a diversion, in the state of Florida, the justice system, I want to show you how equal it is.
Mm-hmm.
A black female gave a warning shot over the head of her estranged husband. Didn't shoot him. There was paper out on him to stay away from her. She received a 20-year sentence.
We did talk about that earlier in the show, and it was even mentioned on the Daily Show last night before they lost their studio lights.
I tuned in late today, sorry.
That's okay. No, we did cover it, and this case was just picked out and fanned for the express, obvious political purpose of trying to get whites and blacks in America angry with each other so we would not be angry with the U.S. government. And it failed miserably.
I agree 110%.
Yeah. It failed miserably, and now the U.S. government is waking up to the fact that there is a single American population that views that government and the banking system as the enemy of the people.
Well, isn't that great?
I think so.
I think it's wonderful.
I think
Here's
it's great.
one other point that was in the Miami Herald today, totally different. Former Senator Robert Graham, Bob Graham, you can look it up yourself. He issued a response to Obama on this debate or discussion about security, and he really rammed him.
I will have to look that up here because, again, following on that article we were talking about last segment, the NSA has this amazing spy apparatus all over the world, and yet it doesn't seem to go after the real criminals in our society. It goes after people who question Monsanto's GMO. It goes after anybody who questions the wars. It goes after anybody who dares to suggest that the income tax is actually illegal and unconstitutional. That's who they're targeting with this. It's not about crime. It's not about terror. We've already demonstrated real criminals and terrorists are completely invisible to the NSA. This is all about keeping an eye on you, the slaves. I
just got a partial check from a conversion that I did for 2010-2011. And it took me from October fighting about it to get a check, I guess, this month. But they wanted to charge me interest, and I followed the law, paid earlier than the time period. And now I want my interest. There's a principal involved there.
There absolutely is, and we have seen this more and more from banks and mortgage companies and even credit card companies where they will say you're not allowed to pay early because they want all of that interest that they need to come in there to keep the Ponzi scheme going. And they'll actually penalize you for paying early or overpaying too much.
Mike, don't you feel that Obama is really crumbling?
Yes.
I mean, I follow international news, and I see how he's thought of, how Washington is thought of, his administration throughout the world. I mean, he's called Hitler. He's called a tyrant, a dictator throughout the world.
Absolutely, but it's not just Obama. The entire federal government has lost its mantle of moral human rights leadership. We're now seen as the new Reich with concentration camps, torturing of prisoners, invading countries on the basis of lies. It's not just Obama, and if Obama were to disappear tomorrow, America's reputation in the world would not change one tiny bit, because the rest of the...
I made a mistake in saying Obama. I agree with you that it's more than just him, but do the American people realize how much this government is ridiculed throughout the globe?
I'm sure that they do. I'm sure that we see the political cartoons all over coming in from other countries and everything. Absolutely, the United States, has lost the illusion of being a world leader, and we're seen as basically this bully. And again, this ham-handed statement by the White House to Russia demanding that they expel Edward Snowden is going to create a political climate in which Putin is going to say, yeah, we have to give him asylum, because if we don't, it's going to look like we, Russia, are subordinate to the will of America, and we're not going to go down that path.
No, exactly. Good for them.
Okay, well, Janet, thank you very much. The calls are piling up here. Let's switch to Bill in Texas. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
A couple of quick things, since I hear you got a bunch of other callers. I moved to Miami in late '79, and I was just in a way amazed, because I'm not used to the area, that this black kid was shot in a guy's front yard. There was no fence around it, but he did have a no trespassing sign.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't arrest him. They didn't do anything. They just said, oh, he was trespassing. He had the right to shoot him. And that was the end of it in Miami in '79. And, you know, you were talking a lot about the shuttle, and I didn't know if you'd heard about this. I worked near the Cape, and I had the frequencies because I worked in aerospace for the relay link.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm listening to the Force shuttle after Challenger, and it's a live feed. And you know how they have those two rockets so they can aim left and right when they're coming in?
The arms system.
One of those rockets, yeah, one of those, I think it was the right one, exploded. And so I could hear the pilot talking, and he's going, look, if the wind blows the wrong way, I can't compensate for it. And luckily he landed safely, and then he wanted the helicopter that has the thermal camera to come in low and zoom in, because hydrogen fuel, which is what they run off of, you can't see the flame very well with the naked eye. And I could hear them on that feed going, no, we can't do that, because we've never done that before, and they'll know something's up. They were talking about the press.
Well, okay.
And they let those guys just sit in there.
Yeah. Well, okay, first of all, we need to back up. The orbital maneuvering system and the reaction control system on the shuttle were not fueled with hydrogen. They were fueled with hypergolic fuels, unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine hydrate and nitrogen tetroxide, I think. It's been a long time since I did rocket science. But the danger there wasn't hydrogen, but if these fuels were leaking, they would, on contact, immediately explode. And we know there were a lot of problems with these shuttles, especially as they got older. And it reached a point before the upgrade in the glass cockpit where NASA engineers were literally going out on eBay trying to find pieces of this older technology. Shuttles would land at the Edwards or at Kennedy, and they would immediately go in and pull systems that had to be put into the next shuttle that was heading out for the pad. That's how ragged the whole operation was, and they had known that there was a problem with those O-rings on the SRBs before Challenger. There'd been burn-throughs before. It's just on this one time the burn-through happened to hit the strut holding the SRB to the external tank. And it was a very, very crazy situation, and they were definitely running on the ragged edge. And I'm actually very surprised there weren't more disasters than we actually saw. And, it was all budget cuts. And, again, the reason Columbia was allowed to land with a probable hole in the port side wing route, because of budget cuts, they didn't include an EVA suit because it wasn't in the mission profile. They didn't have the little manipulator arm, which had TV cameras that they could have put over around the front and taken a look. They didn't have enough onboard fuel to where, knowing that there was a problem with the shuttle, they could have done an orbital plane change and docked with the space station and hold up there until a replacement could be set up. It was all a case of budget cuts, nickel and diming to death, and Columbia was the result of that. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Fred, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. What's on your mind?
Hey, two things. Earlier you were mentioning NSA surveillance of Android systems.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious, only the fact that I have a 1-year-old Kyle Sarah Android phone that I quit using because I couldn't figure out how to downsize my Mojo Man fingers to leprechaun-sized fingers. So rather than shooting the thing, I just tucked it away in case I might figure out how to downsize my fingers in the future. So I was wondering if there was already electronic capability in that thing so that, as you stated earlier, NSA can monitor all the electronic communications emanating to and from it.
Well, the answer is yes. They've been building this stuff into the smartphones even before Android came along. You probably noticed that every single cell phone that is sold has a speakerphone mode. Well, most people don't actually use that. but it justifies having a microphone in the cell phone that is able to hear an entire room. And it's been known for years that law enforcement, government people can remotely turn that microphone on and listen to the room. There have been a couple of high-profile cases involving organized crime where evidence was gathered using this system. At this stage of our history, the safe assumption is it's all compromised. Unless you have something that is completely cut off from the grid, like an old laptop that you don't have an Ethernet cable on it and it doesn't have Wi-Fi, that's your only secure computer that you're going to be able to use. Everything else is completely compromised. We were looking into FinFisher, which apparently is being used to target dissidents, to open up their computers to external manipulation. It's completely out of control. And again, it's all a violation of the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, which says the government may not take your property for public use without just compensation. And here we have the government is using your laptop, your cell phone, your tablet, your internet connection, your Wi-Fi for their nefarious purposes without just compensation. So it's another reminder of how the government is just completely ignoring the Constitution and thereby has delegitimized itself.
And listen to this, Richard Nixon, thank you for that. I suspect the only way then to disengage would be when I'm done with my phone, take the battery out of it.
If you have a removable battery, that will definitely do it. You could also disable the phone by removing the SIM card temporarily, but if you don't feel like opening up your phone, there are companies that are starting to manufacture these cases. This is called a privacy case for those of you on Justin TV, and the manufacturer sent me one as a demo that you can put your phone in there and it is immediately cut off from GPS and from the cell phone network, so you can't be listened to or tracked. And in an earlier age, people would say, oh man, you're being paranoid, but now everybody says, yeah, it's a real problem.
And here's what Nixon in 71 instructed DOJ to investigate the activities of Jewish IRS agents in the belief that Nixon, thought these Jewish IRS agents were protecting wealthy American Jews in paying the tax they rightfully owed. So then, of course, it follows that he was impeached, the only time in history at that point. So, by the way, IRS to me means Infernal Robbery Squad.
Oh, that's a good name. That's a good name, Infernal Robbery Squad. We might adopt that one. But yeah, Nixon apparently felt he had grounds for doing that. You know, it's interesting. Obviously, that investigation went nowhere, and he was caught up in all of his other scandals. But Nixon was impeached for a wide variety of reasons. The real issue, though, was ultimately his actions did delegitimize the government in the eyes of the American people. And it reached a point where they had to do something about it. The whole Watergate thing blew up. The idea, and they were trying to cover larger scandals. They needed to get rid of Nixon before the scandals grew to include the Kennedy assassination, which is really what the burglary of the the Watergate was all about, was Nixon's links to the Kennedy assassination. Because back then in the 1970s, most Americans still bought the Warren Report, the crazed lone nut assassin Lee Oswald. These days, of course, it's very, very different. Most Americans understand, yeah, they lied to us about Kennedy, they lied to us about Bobby Kennedy, they lied to us about Kennedy, lied to us about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. The list of known lies goes on and on and on. And if we can leave one message to the next generation, it should be, you should never, ever, ever trust the government, because it is the government. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at Fox News right now, and they're still going on the reaction to the Zimmerman verdict. That's what you should be thinking about. Don't think about IRS targeting dissidents. Don't think about the EPA giving favorable treatment to the green groups. Don't think about Benghazi. Definitely don't think about Benghazi. Don't think about all these wars and war crimes and crumbling Mideast policy. And definitely don't think about this private central bank Ponzi scheme having destroyed the economy. Don't think about those. Think about Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin. If you're a loyal American, you will pay attention to what we tell you to pay attention to. Harumph, harumph, harumph. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Tate in Michigan. Aloha, Tate. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I wanted to respond to that caller that made the comment about the cops shooting that guy 40 times. He left out, the guy was holding a knife, was in a standoff, hollering at the cops for some time. You can't see who all the cops are. So some people just take your time a little bit. Actually go to YouTube and watch the videos before your buddy gets you all worked up and you call on these shows and look like an idiot. Because I just totally got caught with egg on my face. I watched it in front of a bunch of people and I felt stupid because I didn't watch it first. So.
Well, that's definitely true. Everybody's fanning events for their political gain here, and we do need to find out the actual facts that are going on. On the other hand here, guy with a knife, shoot him once in the leg, take him down. Unloading your guns, I still think it's an overreaction. I really do think it's an overreaction. Okay.
And I'll tell you, here, I live in the suburbs of Detroit, and I go there all the time. It is a violent place. There's a lot of stuff going on. These cops are on edge. They're making $40,000 a year and send their kids into these terrible schools. It's a pressure cooker out here, and I kind of get it when people get excited. And it's just like what happened in Brazil. I'm sure you heard about that soccer player and the referee got in that fight. Did you hear about that?
I remember that. But can I interrupt for a second because apparently Fox News is now breaking a new story about a black teen who was simply taking out the trash, killed by a white homeowner. They're already looking for the replacement case where they can sell this idea of whites are racists and blacks are victims and you've got to be angry with each other. So they've already found the new ones. Zimmerman fizzled. They're already on to Plan Q.
They're trying to get us worked up so we don't look at what's really going on.
That's exactly what they're trying to do.
But we do got to keep our facts straight, no doubt.
No, you are absolutely correct there. And again, the other caller didn't mention the knife and the threatening. But again, you could have used a taser. Could have shot him once in the leg to take him down. Everybody unloading their guns at him. That's ridiculous. I remember that video that we did see a while back about this guy who was trying to get out of his truck and tripped on the seat belt. And the cop there emptied his gun into this guy. And remember, we understand that people who are on these prescription antidepressants, the SSRIs, are prone to insane acts of violence. We know that somewhere between 10 and 15% of the general population are on these medications. I presume 10 to 15%, if not more, of police officers are also on these medications, and that is a real danger. You are 8 times more likely to be murdered by a police accident than you are to be killed by a terrorist in this country.
Well, there's a rampant amount of steroids involved in the police departments. That's not even debated. It's going on. Hang out with these guys, have a few beers with them, and you'll find out where the steroids come from, and they're getting them all. So,
all right.
Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. Everybody will take a news story and they'll try and portray it in a way to push whatever their agenda is. And right now, very obviously, we are seeing this attempt by the U.S. government to repeat the successful campaign of the 1960s to get the black and white people just angry with each other and fighting amongst each other. Then they repeated it in the 1990s with the militant feminist movement. All men are rapists and that's all they are, and they're trying to fan that one up again in Canada right now. It's all about divide and conquer. It's a trick the U.S. government has played dozens and dozens of times on the American people because up until now it worked. But because of the non-race riots, the non-mass violence over the weekend, they burned that one out here. And just any time you see a story that tries to encourage you to hate one of your fellow American citizens, ask yourself who benefits from this. And the answer is always going to be the federal government and the bankers. They want us fighting each other, not them. It's just classic divide and conquer. And it looks like they're already out there looking for the next story about, innocent black child murdered by evil racist white person. Alrighty, getting back to current events, article over at Global Research, title reads The Unspoken Truth, Coup d'etat in America. And it's basically out there saying the American people have suffered a coup d'etat, but they are hesitant to acknowledge it. That's certainly true. A lot of Americans are still trying to go on believing that we are living in a constitutional republic with a democratically elected leadership. And they don't want to see the massive evidence of election fraud. They don't want to see a government that continually panders to Wall Street at the expense of the American people, because it forces onto them a choice of what they're going to do about it. And we're all raised to think that we are moral, honest, honorable people who would take a stand against injustice if we saw it. It's part of our self-image of being a moral, upstanding people. But when you're actually confronted with hard facts about what's really going on inside the government, and I went through this almost 20 years ago when I was looking at the evidence that Vincent Foster had been murdered. You have to make a choice. Am I actually going to try and right the wrong at great risk to person, finances, material wealth, and career? Or am I going to simply go along and say, yeah, you know, they had to bump this guy off, he was an embarrassment to the political structure, at which point you have to surrender your self-image of being a moral, upstanding people. And a lot of Americans don't even want to face that choice. And so they'll go on believing this is still the same nation public school taught them they're living in. And they'll go on gratefully accepting every piece of crude propaganda handed to them so they can go on thinking that they're a good human being, a moral human being, but there's just no reason right now to actually have to stand up and do anything about the situation in the world. And there are a lot of people out there. And I think at some level of their consciousness they understand something has gone horribly wrong with this country, and they're fighting hard not to deal with it. This paradigm crisis. And you get a lot of suppressed anger, rage, frustration. We're seeing it in the driving here in Hawaii. When we first moved here, everybody polite, slow driver, now a lot of road rage. Those cars are practically the only empowerment anybody feels anymore, and they get out there and just see some crazy, crazy driving. It's a symptom, along with alcohol consumption. Go down to your supermarket or your local drugstore, and that alcohol aisle is bigger and grander and taller shelves. And we saw the same thing in the Soviet Union just before they collapsed. Everybody was trying to deal with this conflict between what they wanted to believe their government and nation was all about and what their common sense and their eyes and ears told them what was going on. So we're seeing that here. Now, interesting video we put up at whatreallyhappened.com. This is getting back to Zimmerman. Larry Ment was out there lambasting the corporate media, not just for over-reporting on the Zimmerman case, but for clearly hoping there were going to be riots. They wanted riots. They were pre-selling riots all last week. You know, Zimmerman walks, will be riots. Zimmerman walks, will be. It was everywhere. Floods of tweet. They were just pushing this idea. And he rightly calls the corporate media for being out there almost drooling for riots to report on to boost their ratings. To have something that they could report on safely, because if they report on IRS Gate, they'll get audited. If they report on DOJ Gate, they'll have their phone and computer records seized again. They report on Benghazi Gate, who knows what's going to happen. Michael Hastings was done as an object lesson to reporters. Be very careful where you tread. By the way, little detail on that. Apparently, following the death of Michael Hastings, his body was cremated, even though the family did not request that. Another indication of a cover-up there. Interesting little report came out of INFOWARS, where the police stood down in Oakland as the protest got underway in Oakland. In other words, all the trash can throwing, we pointed out the obvious agent provocateur in the trash can man photo. And the police just backed off to let this thing get going. The police literally withdrew from the area, just walked away and let them do what they were going to do. Quite a contrast to the behavior of the Oakland Police Department during the Occupy protest, where the police got right in there and they were shooting tear gas canisters at the heads of the protesters, trying to injure them. And they did injure this war veteran who was out there protesting. They shot him right in the head. He suffered permanent brain damage from that. But for these protests and riots that would so serve the government's agenda of reigniting race hatred in America, cops just walked away. Let it happen. That's why they reported no arrests. The cops were told to stand down. Apparently there was another kerfuffle over in Los Angeles last night, where they're out there trying to, protesters loot stores, burn flags. It's more agent provocateurs. Over at NBC Los Angeles, they actually admitted the protest was peaceful. Started about 6 o'clock at night, was peaceful. Then a group broke off from the vigil and went and committed the chaos on the streets. That group, those were your undercover FBI and police informants who were sent in there to try and turn the protest violence. And to their credit, the rest of the protesters did not follow along. All right. Let's see. We already talked about this lady who got sentenced to 20 years for firing a warning shot in Florida. It's obvious the laws are unequally applied. It's equally obvious, you know, this woman was being threatened by her estranged husband in her home. He had a temporary restraining order on him not to show up there. He's threatening her, and she fires a warning shot, and they throw her in jail for 20 years. If anybody from the state of Florida's government is listening to this show, you might want to give the governor a phone call and say, now's the time for a little executive clemency. Stand your ground has to apply to this woman. She did claim that defense, and the judge simply said, no, if you're trapped in your own home with your estranged husband threatening you, that doesn't justify stand your ground. It's absurd. I'm sure it'll be overturned on appeal. It is just that absurd. Alrighty, let's see. Take another phone call here real quick. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I just watched like a video. It showed protesters in South Houston blocking the State Highway 288.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you one thing: they weren't in outrage for the injustice. They were in glee, smiling, knowing they got a license to break the law.
Yeah. Anybody who's out there trying to incite violence, they've already been told, you know, nothing's going to happen to you. We need you to go out and create a racial crisis because the U.S. government is desperate to divide us against ourselves. And as Ben Franklin said, we must now hang together or surely we will all hang separately.
Now, it's just the thing is, it's artificial outrage. They're just, because I can tell you, they care less about if Trayvon Martin's dead. It's just a license to break the law and wreak havoc. And they're told nothing's going to happen to them. And,
well,
you know,
if they're undercover FBI informants or the police, undercover police, or if they're just rent-a-ruckus mobs, you know, they're paid to be there. It's a big party. Get to go out and act like a villain. You're not going to be arrested. You're not going to go to jail. And they're trying to fan this thing up. But remember, when the Rodney King riots happened, when that judge told the jury they couldn't find these cops guilty unless they agreed on exactly which blow of the baton represented excess force. The instant that verdict came down, everybody knew there were going to be riots. And they started that very night. We're now, you know, the verdict was Saturday night. We're now here on Tuesday, and there are no mass riots. It's not going to happen. And anybody who's still out there throwing trash cans and setting fires, they're working for the government. They're trying to sell this thing. And now they're already looking for other stories of white-on-black injustice that they can use to try and fan up race hatred and racial distrust. They are that desperate to divide the American people against ourselves, to save their own sorry gluteus maximi.
Well, you know, the thing is, somewhere, I think in West Texas, I read an article last night, a black cop shot a white guy, and he was an ex-convict that the black cop shot. Well, guess what? We're not going out and rioting.
No.
And the person who got shot rightly deserved it. So, you know, and the thing is, you know, it's like we hear all that, but, you know, if you look through Houston, there's a lot of black-on-black crime, shooting at a nightclub, carjacking, and it's all black-on-black crime, but it's not getting
I want to back off of that. It's all crime, period, end of discussion. All crime is wrong. And these are all crimes, or in the case of Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, it was a horrible, tragic accident that was the result of a lot of bad judgment calls on the part of, I think, George Zimmerman. Okay, but the idea of trying to describe it as white on black crime or black on white crime, that's part of the propaganda to try and get everybody to say, okay, we are not a single American people. There's the black people over here, there's the white people here, there's the brown people over here, there's the green people over here, there's the red and the yellow and the peach and taupe and mauve, to try and keep us divided against ourselves. That is clearly the agenda of all of this propaganda we're getting from the corporate media, from the government itself. Remember, the Department of Justice literally went down to Florida to encourage and support the protests. They clearly plan to turn this into a political incident to try and inflame racial tensions, to save themselves. Because, hey, it worked back in the 1960s, but it's not working today.
Well, the message I got is more like the NSA does not discriminate on who they spy against. Inflation from the Federal Reserve note does not discriminate, or there's no segregation. And, you know, you got all these issues, but yet we're fighting over this little petty issue. It's really sad.
You know, it's absolutely true. I mean, we have got things that we probably should be in the streets rioting about. IRS targeting, the illegality of the income tax, these constant wars that are killing our sons and daughters for no other reason than to preserve the bankers' little Ponzi scheme across the globe. We should be angry about that. You know, in a way, Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman are a return to the gladiatorial games of ancient Rome. We're going to show you blood and gore over here to keep the masses placated and not standing up to the emperor. We've got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, George. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Fox News is now running a story on cancer of the eyeball. Boy, they are desperate not to talk about Benghazi, IRS, EPA. Obama's appointing his top fundraisers to all these ambassador positions around the world. They're desperate not to talk about the economy, desperate not to talk about the wars, but of course that's why you're tuned in listening to this show, is to find out what's really going on here. Now, interesting story, major repercussions, not getting a lot of coverage here in the American corporate media. The European Union has set as a new policy that all agreements with Israel must include what is called the exclusion clause, saying that the Israeli settlements in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem are now excluded from any financial deals. In other words, if Israel wants to sell products to the European Union, they cannot be products made in the West Bank and have a Made in Israel label slapped on it and then sold. Because the European Union is taking the position, and this is also the position of the United Nations, the West Bank and East Jerusalem are not part of Israel. And the government of the European Union has gonads the U.S. government can only dream of. Needless to say, Israel's throwing a tantrum. They're calling it an earthquake. They're screaming anti-Semite, Hitler lover, and all the usual stuff that they come out when they don't get their way to do things the way they want to here. Meanwhile, and I want to go back to yesterday we were talking about making sure that we're always talking about the government of Israel and not allowing the government of Israel to sort of blur the line and say criticism of the government of Israel is hatred of the world's Jewish people. And it isn't. We're talking about the actions of a government. And when we criticize the actions of Israel's government, it is not criticism of the world's Jewish people. It's not even criticism of the people of Israel, because they don't like what their government is doing. And right now there are major protests in the Negev, the West Bank, and Gaza against Israel's plan to forcibly relocate some 70,000 Bedouins. So even the Israeli people don't approve of what their government is doing. And we do have a right to criticize the actions of any government on earth. That's what the First Amendment's all about, criticizing the government. The First Amendment right to freedom of speech was not intended to cover exotic dancers or canvases in art galleries with bovine poo stuck to them. It's about the freedom to criticize the government when the government is wrong. Now, you've probably heard over the last several years the idea of the blood diamond. You don't want to buy diamonds from that country. It's causing hardship and war, and you're fueling the war machine that oppresses the people. And basically it's a marketing ploy, because right now Israel is one of the world's leading producers of cut and polished diamonds, and they don't want you going to other people to get your diamonds here. But it turns out that Israel's diamond trade is a significant source of funding for Israel's military. So Israel's diamonds can be construed as blood diamonds under the definitions Israel likes to use. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 3. And we have a caller on the line, Tony in Indiana. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, Mike. What's up? Thanks for taking my call again. I don't watch this show, but my wife does occasionally. It's called The View. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I have. I don't watch it myself either.
Yeah, I don't. That daytime stuff, I really don't. But anyway, one of the co-hosts, whatever, Elizabeth Hasselbeck left. She's been replaced by Jenny McCarthy. And the entire, well, I don't know about the television media, but the internet media, both quote-unquote left-wing and right-wing, are just nailing her to the cross over her being anti-vaccines with thimerosal that causes autism. It's unbelievable. I just want to see what you thought about that.
Well, corporate TV accepts a huge amount of money from pharmaceutical advertising, and they don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. And so, obviously, they're going to be told anybody who challenges the safety and efficacy of any product coming out of Big Pharma, has to be shouted down and criticized, smeared, dismissed in any way possible. And anybody who does show the courage to stand up and say, there's a real demonstrable problem here, their career is going to trickle away and eventually vanish. And I imagine when the contract comes up for renewal, there'll be some discussion about that, if not an outright termination. One of the reasons that I am so happy with RBN, and I'm sure this is true of all the other hosts here as well, RBN doesn't tell us what stories to do, and more importantly, what stories we should not do. And it is a critical issue where you have to understand corporate media, and especially the news, are very subservient to their major advertisers. We saw that certainly out in California with Proposition 37, where Monsanto literally went to all the corporate media outlets out there and said, if you do not oppose Prop 37, we will stop advertising in your company, and we'll take our advertising dollars somewhere else. And those corporate media managers said, oh, no, go on sending us the checks, we'll run your commercials, and we'll toe the line here. And it is a very, very corrupted system. So I'm not surprised at all that anybody who gets on the show and talks about questionable vaccine efficacy and safety is going to be attacked. I know that earlier on The View, I remember there was somebody who was out there saying, we're not really sure what happened on 9/11. They got kicked off. It's pretty blatant and obvious right now.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much. I was just looking at this headline. I mean, they're still trying to fan Zimmerman. They're still trying to move this thing forward. And Fox was running a lower third banner on there saying the Zimmerman protests take an anti-capitalist turn. So now they're going to try and drag in Occupy and all these people who hate capitalism. And by the way, for the record, we love capitalism. It's fascism that we're dealing with. We're not a capitalist nation any longer. We have deteriorated into economic fascism. And all these Occupy protesters and Tea Party people are out there. They're not against capitalism. They're opposed to fascism. They seek a return to true capitalism. That's what's going on here. Get back to the economic system that works for the nation. Anyway, let's see. Moving right along over into Syria, more car bombs and mortars rocking Damascus. Right now, the pro-war faction, meaning mostly the United States and Israel, are trying to regain the initiative inside Syria. As you're probably aware, last week the hired mercenary factions began to fight amongst themselves. It's a very negative turn of events. When we come back from these commercials, more about Syria. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as we've been reporting over the last few weeks, Israel has carried out numerous incursions and outright bombing attacks into Syria. Earlier this month, there was yet another airstrike on what was claimed to be a weapons factory. May have been, may not have been, we don't really know. Russia Today is reporting that this last airstrike by Israel was launched from airfields inside Turkey, which, if it's confirmed, is only going to increase public anger in Turkey against Erdogan. And in effect, and we're seeing this in places like Activist Post Forum, Israel is waging an undeclared war on Syria. And they're being described as a rogue state, simply attacking whoever they feel like attacking whenever they feel like attacking. But the Syrian agenda is in serious trouble, because the original model was try and have the hired mercenaries overthrow Assad. That's been running for almost 3 years. And last week, the factions within the hired mercenaries, all of whom dream of being the new government of Syria, started fighting amongst themselves. There was an assassination of one of the rebel leaders, and they're now starting to fight among themselves, starting to fall apart. The U.S. had been planning on using Turkey as a staging point for the invasion of Syria, which is the last stepping stone before the long lusted-for war with Iran. And they were even going to be using Egypt under Morsi. And one of the reasons the military the military did side with the ouster of Morsi was Morsi's plan to deploy Egypt's military into Syria. And they didn't want to do that. So the U.S. and Israel lost Egypt as a jumping off point. Turkey is very much in play. Erdogan's government could collapse at any moment from the protests up there. Now they're trying to regroup and look at Jordan as a staging area for a ground invasion. The war in Syria is going very, very badly. And worse, this cover story that we are aiding a noble popular revolution against an evil tyrant dictator has pretty much cratered. Nobody's buying that anymore. We recognize a covert regime change when we see it. And so they're still thrashing around on that one. And as the story we were talking about during the first segment of the hour is talking about, they're back to trying to use acts of terror in Damascus, trying to scare, trying to terrorize the Syrian people into abandoning Assad and joining with them. And it's not working for precisely the same reason that the Nazi Germany terror attacks against Britain with the V1 and V2 backfired. It hardened the resolve of the people to stand by their government no matter what. So they're making a big mistake there. Interesting story that came out of Letho News, and it was originally sourced to The Guardian in Great Britain, where a report has surfaced showing that the Central Intelligence Agency and MI6 jointly planned to assassinate Syria's leadership back in 1957. Trying to get rid of a government that dares run that nation for their own benefit. No, 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 no. You're only allowed to have governments that do what is best for American corporations and private central banking and so forth and so on. Rioting continues in Egypt. 7 dead over the last night, 261 injured, 400 people arrested. Egypt is very much in play. I think the problem that Morsi committed, and we've seen this in history, the very worst mistake an incoming revolutionary government can do is decide they can start living the way the previous government did. And the people don't react to that very well. Historians often talk about the French Revolution as if it was a single event. But it wasn't. It was multiple revolutions, one after the other, from 1793 to 1808, where after the monarchy fell, the new French government came in and said, all right, we get the goodies now. We get the wealth. We get to throw our weight around. And the French people didn't go for that, so they had another revolution, and then another revolution after that, until finally they got a government that said, we'd better do what the French people tell us to do, or we're going to be next. And so when we talk about a revolution, very rarely is it a single event. In the case of the United States of America, because it was effectively an external government that was thrown out, there was one American Revolutionary War. But then, of course, Britain came back in the War of 1812 trying to recolonize the United States, to force them back onto private central banking. Alrighty, let's see. And further complicating the diplomatic situation, the appointed Vice President of Egypt, Mohammed al-Baradei, requested a meeting with the Turkish government to try and sort of sort things out, and was rebuffed when Erdogan came back and said, our president is Morsi, effectively saying, we don't recognize a new government in Egypt. We will only deal with Morsi. And so now this is a huge diplomatic row between Turkey and Egypt. Egypt is now basically sending a message to Turkey, please do not meddle in our internal affairs, which is a perfectly rational thing for them to be saying. Now, there's a very alarming development, and before I go into it, I want to go back and recap something I was talking about last week, and in fact the week before. When the new Egyptian revolution began and Morsi was driven from power, and I understand he's now under arrest, we saw the Egyptian military immediately deploy tanks to the Sinai, ostensibly to deal with smuggling tunnels into Gaza. But I speculated at that time that the Egyptian military might realize that Israel sees Egypt's current turmoil as an opportunity to retake the Sinai, and that they were trying to preempt it by fortifying the Sinai. Now, under the last treaty between Israel and Egypt, Egypt has limits on how much military power they can have inside the Sinai. And they were pushing that limit by saying, we're here to shut down the tunnels and so forth. But I think they're there anticipating a possible Israeli incursion into the Sinai. Oh, we need a buffer zone to stop the smuggling into Gaza. We need more security area. And now we're getting this story that some unknown party fired several mortar rounds from Egypt, from the Sinai, into Israeli territory. Didn't hit anything important. Just blew up a lot of dirt. And it looks to me like Israel is at least considering finding some way to justify going back into the Sinai. And we need to be on guard against that. Meanwhile, of course, Israel is expressing a great deal of nervousness about Russia's growing influence in the Middle East. And we should not be surprised by that, because U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East is crumbling because of this unquestioning obeisance to Israel's policies in the region, and all the regime change, and all of the bringing down of Saddam Hussein over weapons of mass destruction that did not exist, because Iraq dared sell their oil for the euro instead of the dollar. And then they went after Gaddafi in Libya because he dared to say that Libya's oil would be sold for the gold dinar and not the dollar. And so countries in the Mideast don't trust the United States anymore. The United States' influence in the Middle East is clearly on the wane, and Russia, of course, is going to move to fill that vacuum. And now Israel's saying, oh, the Russians are coming, you Americans should go kill them for us. And I'm sure Israel would be perfectly happy if the U.S. and Russia got into an all-out nuclear war and just sent both nations back to the Stone Age, because that would leave Israel with their now acknowledged nuclear arsenal in control of the Middle East oil resources, and through those oil resources they would exert control over much of the world and Europe, the way the United States did during the days of the petrodollar deal. Now, after a long pause, the Arab nations are once again uniting to launch an effort to condemn Israel over their undeclared nuclear weapons. Now, the fact that Israel has and has had all along nuclear weapons is no longer a topic for argument. Germany admitted not too long ago they've known for years that Israel is arming those Dolphin-class submarines given to them by Germany with nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. Even Israel's own media did a show on the hidden plutonium bomb factory concealed underneath the nuclear reactor at Dimona. The new incoming government of South Africa declassified documents showing that Israel was trying to sell clandestine nuclear weapons to the former government of South Africa, which is the very activity the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. Yet Israel will not sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, will not allow IAEA inspections, They keep pointing the finger at Iran. Oh, Iran, they're getting ready to do something bad. Go bother them. And the Arab nations are uniting, which of course is something Israel absolutely is terrified of, and they're uniting to basically say, we know Israel has nuclear weapons. They are the destabilizing threat in the Middle East. It is time to do something about that. So, meanwhile, there's one other very alarming development following on this largest war games in history. Russia seems to be putting more and more of their frontline strategic forces into what's called full combat readiness. In other words, loaded with live ordnance, ready to go at a moment's notice. They're continuing to send a clear, unequivocal message to the United States, no more. Do not go into Syria. Do not go into Iran. We refuse the dollarification of the world's economy. This is the red line. Do not cross it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And there's a very interesting story. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. This was carried in From the Trenches World Report, where apparently Panama did a snap inspection for drugs on a North Korean flagged ship. And they found undeclared military equipment hidden inside a cargo of brown sugar. Now, the Panamanian authorities have seized the vessel and the weaponry. And they have said, they told CNN, the ship had arrived from Cuba. Now, Cuba has been under a major embargo by the United States going all the way back to the Bay of Pigs. In fact, even before that, the fall of Batista, the U.S. puppet in Cuba. Batista got kicked out. Castro came in. Castro tried to be friends with the United States. The United States said, no, we want our puppet ruler back. And that was what drove Cuba into the Soviet sphere of influence, which was a huge political embarrassment for the United States of America. But Cuba doesn't really have a lot of weapons. Most of the weapons in Cuba are on the Guantanamo base, leased by the United States of America, and maintained purely to keep poking a thumb into the eye of Cuba. There's actually no military necessity to have that base in Cuba. Of course, it's a really great place to have these torture camps to keep the scars out of the eyes of the corporate media and the American people here. But I'm wondering what's going on here. I wouldn't think Cuba had a surplus of weapons to send to North Korea. It would almost seem to be going the other way, that North Korea would want to arm Cuba against a possible new U.S. invasion. And therein might, in fact, be the agenda here, because we know the United States knows how to hold a grudge. I mean, think how many years it's been since the Bay of Pigs. We're coming up on 50 years, actually. Half a century, and the U.S. is still holding a grudge. We're going to embargo Cuba because this little tiny island nation is an insult and a threat to the United States of America. And we might well see in this new era of U.S. militarism, they try and concoct some way to retake Cuba, give the mafia back all those casinos and donkey shows and everything. But it's a very strange story because of the direction the weapons are flowing. If it was a North Korean ship caught taking weapons to Cuba, we just say, all right, well, these things happen. But saying the ship had arrived from Cuba on its way to North Korea, that just doesn't feel right. There's something else going on. We need to keep an eye on that. Meanwhile, story out of RIMF.com reminding everybody that Obama's military budget for the United States is the largest military budget since World War II itself. Vast sums of money being spent on military hardware, and much of it is not very good and not even worth the money. F-22, after 4 years, they still can't figure out why it's asphyxiating its pilots. The F-35 defines the word boondoggle. 10 years of development, $1 trillion, more than the entire gross domestic product of Australia. Still can't fly in the rain, can't fly in the fog. The helmet fire control system still won't work. The naval version can't land on a carrier because they put the arrestor hook too close to the main landing gear. Even the Pentagon admits it's heavier than it was supposed to be. It's not as maneuverable as it was supposed to be. They're literally rewriting the statement of requirements so they can say the plane has come up to their expectations. But even the Pentagon is admitting if it gets into a dogfight, air-to-air combat with its Russian contemporaries, the F-35 is going to lose. And so the United States, for all this money that it's spent on its weapons programs, may not get the bang for its buck. And so this vast sum of money may not be the ironclad guarantee of victory so many people think it is. There's a very funny movie called The Pentagon Wars, based on a book of the same name, and it's based on the true story of the corruption regarding the development of the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. And at the very opening of the movie, there's the character played by Kelsey Grammer, who's like in charge of development of the Bradley. And he's testifying before Congress, we won the Cold War because we proved we could shovel the money into the fire faster than the Russians. And it's funny because we recognize that is the mindset of the Pentagon. Take as much money from the people as you can, military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about, and just spend, 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 and we will have military superiority. Maybe not. Remember those littoral combat ships they poured all that money into, and the Pentagon now admits they're under-armored, under-armed. Their onboard computer systems are wide open to remote hacking. We can have very expensive weapons. They may not be all that effective, and it is our sons and daughters who pay the price for being sent into combat with weapon systems that may not work. For those who are old enough to remember the Vietnam era, the whole debacle over the M16, where military officers with financial interests in the competing rifle, the M14, literally sent troops into combat with the wrong ammunition. So the guns would jam, and they could say, oh, the guns are jamming, we must buy this other rifle. And kids got killed trying to make the point, trying to sell this competing gun here, until Congress intervened and said, no, the M16 is clearly superior. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And over in Spain, of course, there's a huge uproar over there. The Spanish Prime Minister is refusing to resign over corruption charges. And they've got eyewitnesses. This guy was taking bribes for years, and the Spanish people are very, very upset. Could start to see massive protests there. The Spanish people have been feeling the bite of austerity for years now. And the quality of life in Spain is rapidly deteriorating, and they're understanding it has nothing to do with their willingness to work or how productive they can be when the wealth of the nation is being siphoned off by that private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And so the whole world is getting angry with their government. That's a good thing. This push to create a new world order, a global fascist economic dictatorship, has literally brought the world to the edge of a global revolution. We might actually see all of these private central banks brought down at the exact same time, and it would be a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-multiple-lifetime opportunity to free the world from this form of slavery. Same kind of slavery we fought a revolution to be free of back in 1776. Now, we've talked a lot about drones and the growing awareness that these drones are now being deployed across the United States to keep an eye on the American people. Make sure the slaves don't get uppity ideas about standing up to their masters in Wall Street and Washington, D.C. And we've previously expressed concern about how these are relatively uncontrolled in the civilian airspace. There have been a couple of incidents of near misses where drones almost collided with civilian passenger transport. And you need to remember something about drone pilots, because their own butt is not in that device. They're probably not as careful a pilot as they would be if they were flying themselves around. And the possibility of accidents happening because of these drones cannot be overlooked. And as a matter of fact, a video got leaked out regarding a German drone that crashed into a plane on the runway down in Afghanistan. So these things really can happen. Now, of course, if they start saying no drones in the terminal control areas, which would be a good idea, it means that anybody conducting illegal activity, that they don't want spied on from the sky. They just go down to those industrial parks around the airports and they set up business there. So again, a lot of money for something that won't really be effective at doing what they say it's going to do. It's just to remind you the government is watching you. And of course we know that many of these drones are weaponizable, which is a polite word meaning they can put tasers and tear gas, shotguns on these things. Very bizarre situation down in Texas. As you know, Texas has passed a very restrictive abortion law, banning abortions after the 20th week. Which, if you think about it, that's 4 months. If you haven't made up your mind by then, you're in trouble. And they're fanning it up as, oh, abortion, big issue, pay attention to this, don't pay attention to IRS Gate and Benghazi and the rest of it. But a very bizarre situation where apparently women going into the hearings at the Texas Senate were told that they had to surrender at the security gate their tampons and maxi pads out of fear they might hurl them at the senators as a form of protest, presumably unused. But the Texas concealed carry laws were still in effect, and people could take guns into the Senate chamber. That seemed like kind of a weird situation where maxi pads are considered a bigger threat to the senators than guns. I think it supports the argument that all of our government people are on these SSRIs because they're just not thinking very clearly. And apparently also in Texas, a judge was found dead in his chambers from a gunshot wound to the head. Originally triggered a lockdown on the court building. Now they're saying basically they're presuming it was a suicide. Not saying why this judge felt he had to commit suicide at that particular point. Now we were talking about police violence unchecked here. And there's the story of Dustin Theo Harris. This was an innocent man shot 16 times by the police up in Washington State. The police basically executed a search warrant on the home where this guy, Dustin Theo Harris, was renting a basement room. They were looking for a completely different guy who was there, and after they apprehended him, they had the guy the warrant said we want. They proceeded to search the home. And when they came across this man sleeping in this downstairs room, something happened and the police shot him 16 times. He survived, amazingly enough. And he's filed a $20 million lawsuit against the Department of Corrections. Now, the problem with that is very simple. The taxpayers of Washington State are going to pay that settlement. And if you want to really disincentivize police violence, you need to make the police officers themselves personally, financially liable for damages they cause when they exceed their authority. That would fix the problem very, very quickly. Now, an interesting story over at TomatoBubble.com, and the headline reads, "Why are the global Zionists throwing bricks at bricks?" Meaning the acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and I forget what the S is for. But they formed their own international trading consortium, and they're proposing their own international trade and reserve currency. And the reason we're seeing these attacks on the BRIC nations to discredit them and ridicule them is, of course, that independent trade reserve currency is a threat to the dollar's domination of the global economy. And, of course, it's not the only one. China is openly promoting the gold-backed yuan as a replacement for the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is in decline. People don't want to use it anymore. It's untrustworthy. It's being overprinted with reckless abandon, trying to prop up Wall Street. And so the U.S. government is trying to keep the dollar as the world's global reserve currency, trade currency, by force of arms, by threat of military intervention. That was the real reason for the invasion of Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. We even have George Bush on video admitting Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. Iraq and Al-Qaeda were not aligned. In fact, they were ideological opposites. What happened was in 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for euros under the Oil for Food program. 1 year later, 2003, the United States screams weapons of mass destruction, and they invade. And Iraq's oil is back on sale in the world market, but only for the U.S. dollar. It's an attempted continuation of the petrodollar scam, as part of a larger program to force the entire world back onto the post-World War II Bretton Woods Agreement. And the rest of the world does not want to go that way. They remember how the Federal Reserve abused Bretton Woods to enrich themselves at the expense of the rest of the world. They remember what happened when France tried to convert those paper and ink notes back to gold at $35 an ounce, which was part of the Bretton Woods Agreement. And Richard Nixon said, we don't actually have that much gold, so go pound cheese, or words to that effect here. Speaking of gold, physical precious metals are beginning to gain again. They've already recovered most of the losses from that hammer down we saw last month. And apparently what is stimulating this increased demand and price in physical metal is that Cyprus is now backtracking on selling off their gold and silver reserves to try and raise money to deal with all of this manufactured debt by the money junkies. Now, premiums for physical are very high in both China and India. They're buying physical as fast as they can. China has doubled gold deliveries. Now, I mentioned earlier about this wonderful documentary, The Secret World of Gold, which was on the History Channel last week. I understand it's on YouTube in its full, complete length, so you can go watch it. And one of the points they make there is that gold and silver are a reliable indicator of the true state of the world's economy, because the physical gold and silver will always flow to those nations who are generating wealth through products and exports. And it's flowing to Asia right now. Got this other story here from Investment Watch blog. The Brinks gold vaults are rapidly being depleted. People have started to distrust these gold brokerages, that supposedly you buy gold that's stored in their vaults. And that's something else this documentary covered, how it's a position on paper only. And the gold really isn't there. And some of these customers were actually being charged vault storage fees for gold they thought they owned but did not actually exist. And people are realizing if you're going to invest in physical silver and gold, you'd better have it under your own control. The real problem continues to be those gold futures contracts, which have been sold well in excess of the available supply and mining capacity. And we've already hit a point where gold brokerages, when these contracts come due, they're having to settle for cash plus a premium. Cash value of what the gold would be worth today plus a 20% uplift in order to keep people from suing for failure to deliver. But that's not going to last much longer. As the overprinting of currencies start devaluing the dollar, the currency, that much more rapidly, you're going to reach a point where people say, I don't want the paper and ink, I want the gold. I gave you money to deliver gold to me on this date. If you don't give me that physical gold, I will sue. And according to this article out of Investment Watch blog, it looks like there is already a run on the gold bullion brokerages. Now, something very, very weird is going on. If you look at the Treasury Department's valuation of the current U.S. government debt, it has been sitting at $16,699,000,000 blah, blah, for 56 days. It is sitting there just $25 million below the congressional legal limit on U.S. government debt. Do you really think the government just stopped borrowing 56 days ago? Or are they trying to conceal from the American people and the world that the U.S. government is already in default? We know they're already defaulting on the Social Security recipients. Starting in the Clinton administration, they were taking money out of the Social Security Trust Fund, that cash buildup for the baby boomer retirements, putting it over in the general revenues ledger and spending it like general revenues. That's where Clinton got his magic federal budget surplus. Hey, it's the economy, stupid. We're doing a really good job. We got a budget surplus. We got money to spend. And it was the retirement money of American workers. And you need to remember, that's not the government's money. You, the American worker, trusted the government with your retirement money. It was a separate deduction out of every single paycheck. And the government went and spent it on other things. And now the Social Security Trust Fund is full of IOUs that they cannot make good on. And that's why they're talking about cutting benefits and raising the retirement age. The U.S. government looked around at all the people they owed money to, and they picked you, the American people, as the party they were going to default on because you can't do anything about it. And now we're seeing this very obvious charade over at the Treasury Department, where they're holding the admitted U.S. government debt just below the legal limit for 56 days. You believe that one? I got some of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction to sell you. Over in Great Britain, they're now admitting their enforced austerity is going to last for 5 more decades, another half century, 50 years. Significant part of the British population will not live long enough to see economic better times. They're trying to blame the old people. Oh, all those old people that need medical care and everything. And again, that was part of the deal. You paid taxes to the government so they would take care of you when you were past your productive years. But, oh, no, it's the fault of those old people. They should do the patriotic thing and just die off more quickly. Meanwhile, apparently, Britain's established assisted death program has been shut down over allegations that people were put into this program without their permission. You know, quick, get rid of them. They're costing the government too much money. And a lot of people are pointing out that much of the aspects of Obamacare seem modeled along the same lines. You know, if spending so much money on you to keep you alive a little longer doesn't generate a rate of return, if you don't go back to work and contribute to the system, well, we should just save the resources and let you pass away quietly. And it sort of underscores the reality that these governments do not see their populations as human beings worthy of respect. We're being treated as herd animals, as livestock. We're told what food we should eat, what food we can't eat, what medications we must take, what medications we can't take. And now we're being spied on constantly to make sure we don't try and break out of our little pens and return to the wild. Because of the severe financial hardship in Great Britain, the London police ignore 45% of all crimes reported. Street attacks, burglaries, fraud, rape, 45% of them, nobody responds. But Goldman Sachs is doing great. Their second quarter earnings have doubled. They're just raking it in left and right here. Oh, my goodness. Alrighty, let's see. Stock market ended slightly in the red. It's not open the window and jump out situation, but it's got to be making investors nervous. They've gotten used to Wall Street's high-frequency computer traders and the plunge protection team keeping that market going up, and it's starting to stumble. One reason may be that the Fed's S. George has come out saying it is now time to begin revising downward this quantitative easing bond buying, because the damage it's doing to the value of the dollar overall now exceeds its benefits in keeping Wall Street and the stock market propped up. And every time they talk about shutting down or reducing quantitative easing, the stock market takes a dive because it's all being held up by that instant money, $85 billion a month, created out of thin air and poured on Wall Street to try and keep the illusion going that the economy is not in trouble. Consumer prices in the U.S. rose in June by the most in the last 4 months, mostly tied into gasoline prices. Now, we're hearing that the rise in gasoline prices is all because of the turmoil in Egypt. And no, it isn't. We are seeing reports in the European press that it's because of speculation, commodities manipulation, any excuse to make more money off the backs of ordinary people. Anyway, we're going to take a break for commercials. Back with the closing segment of our show today after these words from our... And aloha, welcome back to the show. And speaking of McDonald's and his burger joint here, we're all aware of how McDonald's just pays their people the absolute minimum. They're actually demanding a 4-year college degree to be a cashier at McDonald's. They're paying their people with these prepaid debit cards on which the bank gets to charge a fee for these employees to get their own money out of the card. But McDonald's is now responding to the incredible hardship they have imposed on their own employees by offering classes on how to live on this little money, how to budget on your meager earnings. See, we care about you. We're not going to pay you anymore. You know, we're not going to pay you in a way that the bank doesn't get a bigger piece of the action when you get your money. We'll just tell you how to accept the new reduced standard of living. You can go dumpster diving if you're a little bit hungry here. You don't need to have the new laptop. You can play with the computers we have there at the cash registers. Real warm, fuzzy corporate leadership here. By the way, for those of you celebrating the return of the Twinkie, they're going to be available at the same price. The bad news is they're going to be a lot smaller. All right, we're coming up here on the end of the show, and I want to go back to this Zimmerman and this very obvious attempt to continue and build on the policy of racial tension and crisis in the United States of America. This is classic divide and conquer, and as you go out and about talking to your friends, your family, your co-workers, everybody, and they're talking about Zimmerman, just tell them this is a classic trick by the government. They got caught doing it back in the 1960s under COINTELPRO to keep Americans arguing against Americans so that we do not realize we are a single American people, and the biggest problem with the nation is an out-of-control, unconstitutional, and illegitimate federal government and a Wall Street culture of corruption and fraud that views the world as a giant money bin that they are entitled to dip into, by hook or by crook, mostly by crook. Do not fall for it. The U.S. government is desperate to turn American against American any way that they can. Black against white, pro-abortion against anti-abortion, gays against straight. They're desperate. They're out there just throwing these things out there, trying to find traction. Do not fall for it. The common enemy of all mankind are these privately owned central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And from them flows all of this immense debt nations and people struggle with, and all of these wars to keep their little scam going a little bit longer. And so I need all of you, the Rivero's Rangers, to get out there on the grassroots and bring some common sense to the world. And tell them, don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. The government loves to play dirty. I hear the music. It's time for us to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, make good choices. Go ahead and be angry. You deserve it. Please support Republic Broadcasting all you can. We're in a period of amazing growth. We need your help to move forward. And aloha, America.